Hi, I'm Matt with Schematical, and today I'm interviewing Jonathan Hall, the tiny, well, I had it right here, tiny DevOps guy. so, uh,
That's right.
welcome to the Schematical podcast. Which thank you for doing this episode. We're not really like that formal or anything. I'm kind of just playing around, but yeah.
Awesome.
And you're coming to us from the Netherlands, is that
I
correct?
am. Yeah. I live just outside of Amsterdam.
So, I'd love to hear the story of how you made your way over there.
Okay. So I'm from the Midwest United States, born in Oklahoma. I went to high school in Kansas. Um, then I was a digital nomad for a while. I lived in Mexico for a couple of years, 2011 through 13, I think. And then I had to come back to the US for a while and decided to become a digital nomad. So I spent 2.5 years traveling kind of all over, mostly Europe, but I went to South Africa and Brazil and a few other places as well. During that time, I met a girl, and we decided to settle down. And so I applied for jobs sort of around the world. We didn't really have a place we wanted to live, and we ended up taking it. I ended up taking a job in Amsterdam. So that's how we ended up here, and we've been here about 8 years now.
Nice. All right. Well, I love it there. So, I am somewhat jealous of you. Um, well, great. And so, how'd you end up? Well, now you're doing more of the Golang stuff. So, I guess if you do you want to talk about your current Golang stuff, and we'll circle back to the apps.
Yeah, sure, sure. So yeah, I've my whole career I've sort of been straddling the back end and what is sometimes called the DevOps world. Back end and infrastructure. I used to be full stack in the sense that I like installed physical servers into data centers and wrote the software that ran on them at the same time. I've sort of niched down a little bit since then, since the Wild West days. So I do a lot of work on back end development, mostly in Go, and sort of the foundational parts of the application, logging and monitoring and architecture of apps more than say just day-to-day feature development. I definitely know how to build REST endpoints, but that's not really my strong suit. My strong suit is getting laying the foundation that makes an app work for the rest of the team to build the features on top of, and that closely relates to the infrastructure side. So I've done a lot of work on. I've actually have pull requests that have been accepted into the Sentry SDK for Go, and logging libraries and different things like this, because that's kind of where my focus is at, is making apps, uh, building the glue between your app and the infrastructure it runs on.
Sounds familiar. Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, what is your infrastructure of choice? Are you more of an AWS, ECS? I kind of did listen to a podcast you did recently where it was AWS versus ECS, and I've got some takes on that.
Yeah.
But
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, it's not really that important. Is the first answer to that. So I don't want to start a war. I'm happy to have a friendly arm wrestle, but I don't want to have a war about it. But I prefer Google generally. I just feel like it's a little more user friendly, and also it certainly for Kubernetes in that sort of workload, it's easier. I mean, more or less invented Kubernetes. They were the sort of the first movers there. They had managed Kubernetes before AWS did, and even now that AWS has it, I still feel like it's a smoother operation on Google. But all the cloud providers provide great service. So I mean, if you're on AWS or Azure or DigitalOcean or whatever, I, I, I'm not going to be angry at you.
now this kind of goes without saying, but the reason that you can be agnostic is largely in part to Docker. You agree or no?
Well, yeah, I mean, so yes, I mean, Docker is a big part of it. I mean, as long as you can build a Docker container, or an image, you can run it on EC2, you can run it in Kubernetes, you can run it on just about almost any VM. I mean, maybe there's uh, some cloud provider that doesn't provide Docker support, but it would be strange to see that.
Hmm.
So yeah, you can do it just about anywhere.
Yeah, I remember the switch from AWS OpsWorks, where we were using kind of like a Jenkins style script to spin up our instances and customize each one of them to Docker, and it was night and day. So one of
Yeah.
the biggest achievements in this field in quite a while. Well, that's good. So Yeah, that's funny you say. It's funny you say that about EKS versus Google. I've got a client right now that I'm migrating off of EKS and actually off of Kubernetes, mainly for
Hmm.
that reason, is that it's not nearly as nice as it could be, on other
Yeah,
platforms. So,
yeah,
and not to say that it's totally wrong. If you can get it to work for you, that's great. We just went to the ECS stuff just because it was easier for them to manage it. They didn't have a big enough team to have someone dedicated just to Kubernetes.
yeah. I mean, Kubernetes is it's a wonderful product. I love Kubernetes, but it's not the right tool for if a really small application or a small team. Pick the right tool for your job.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. So, what are some trends you're seeing in the industry right now? Where do you think DevOps is going? What are the new, well, what should people be keeping an eye out for on the horizon?
So that's an interesting question. I think the big trend right now is it's really one about wording more than an actual trend, but it's the platform engineering. We're hearing a lot about that lately. Um, and there was a meme going around for a while. Uh, uh, DevOps is dead. Long live platform engineering, which is kind of silly because platform engineering is a subset of DevOps. It's kind of like saying automobiles are dead. Long live transmissions. Like, no, you can't you can't do that.
Yeah.
But even so, there is this trend that platform engineering is getting a lot of attention. That's good and bad, I think. I mean, it's good because I think a lot of people have this idea, or at least have had the idea, that DevOps means that everybody on the team has to have all the skills to do Kubernetes and Docker and monitoring and everything. It's like the master of all full stacks. That's not true. Or a close cousin to that is the idea that DevOps means that every team has infrastructure engineers on it. And that's not true either. DevOps is more a way of thinking about how to get work done, and you can still divide and conquer to whatever extent is appropriate in your context. Um, and one way to do that is a platform team, which is why, like I said earlier, platform engineering is a subset of DevOps, not a replacement for it. Um, but so in that sense, it's useful that platform engineering is getting attention because it's drawing attention to the fact that you don't need to have every engineer with Kubernetes chops or even a dedicated Kubernetes guru on your team to do DevOps right. That's good. The bad part of this trend is that we're starting to hear people who don't really have the background using the term platform engineering in the wrong way. Exactly the same way it's always happened with Agile and DevOps and any new trend. Someone hears the term and they jump to a conclusion about what it means, and they start writing influencer posts on LinkedIn about the wrong content and confusing the whole world about it.
Yeah. No, people have debated it before, the terminology, exactly, what it means. So I agree with you there. It's interesting thing about the cross training is with my clients. A lot of times I intend to train their staff up, and I find the staff to be somewhat resilient. They are reluctant, I guess, reluctant. They sometimes they don't want to know how it runs. They don't want to know, what webhook is listening for the git commit that triggers the build and everything. They just want to hit commit and let it go. And that's okay for some, but they should have someone on their staff typically, depending on the arrangement, but depending on the size of their
Mm-hmm.
company. I try and train up their guys internally, but you'd be amazed how many people just, no, I just want to hit commit and have it magically spin up somewhere. I'm like,
Yeah,
you sure you don't want to know how this goes? So that's
which
the
I think is
interesting.
one. Yeah, and I think that exact phenomenon is one of the reasons why um, platform engineering people or DevOps engineers or SREs, whatever term you want to use to describe the people doing this stuff, are so well paid because they're not the people who are afraid to learn how things work under the hood. And they can't be. I mean, maybe they could try, but they're not going to be successful. You have to learn a lot of things to do this sort of work, which is maybe a bad thing because the there's a high bar for entry, but these people do get paid well.
Yeah, so if you're looking for a job, a career in that, I'd recommend it.
Yeah.
And I can't even claim to be the best DevOps guy as an architect. I mean, it's part of my job, but I've worked with people that are vastly better at it than I am. But I can
Oh
get
yeah.
the average startup moving at least. Um, So great. So what? Let's talk infrastructure as code. Do you have any weapons of choice there? I mean, I'm assuming Terraform, but
So I definitely have Terraform experience. I work a lot. You mentioned that I go by the moniker the tiny DevOps guy. Um, uh, a lot of the companies I work with are small enough that they don't necessarily need Terraform yet. I mean, I've have used Terraform on really small in small companies, but not all. Having said that, I am a huge advocate for infrastructure as code, even from like day zero, because I think it's really important to have a reproducible um, infrastructure. If you're deploying to the cloud, at least it should be reproducible. You don't want to get caught by surprise when somebody accidentally deletes your cluster and it takes you 6 weeks to get it back up again because nobody documented how it goes. If you have infrastructure as code in some form, in theory, it's the push of a button to get your infrastructure back. Maybe not your data, but at least your infrastructure. So, I like to say that the simplest infrastructure, yeah, I like to say the simplest infrastructure as code tool out there is Bash. And if nothing else, at least script your installation.
mm-hmm.
So that's often where I start. It doesn't take long to outgrow that. Once you know the tools like Terraform, it doesn't take long to get to the point where you want something better than Bash. But at minimum, start with Bash.
Nice. Yeah. When I started in 2010, I think it was when I started on AWS, I had no concept of that really. And then we kind of worked our way up and did ops works with, I think, like I said, Jenkins, and then eventually CloudFormation. And then I
Hmm.
discovered Terraform, which was platform agnostic. And it was like, oh my goodness. And so, yeah, I start my little projects day one in Terraform, but I'm also a
Hmm.
massive nerd like that. So I don't expect everybody to
Yeah.
do that. But so what are some of the other tools you'd recommend people check out, or tools you use on a regular basis?
Well, I use a lot of tools. If we're talking like infrastructure stuff, I mean, yeah, I kind of have a preference for. I like GitLab. I like the fact that GitLab gives you a built-in CI pipeline that I am comfortable with, and a whole bunch of other tools, monitoring tools, and integrations with Kubernetes. That's kind of a all-in-one platform. It is opinionated, so it's not going to be the right fit for everybody. Um, but most teams are using GitHub these days, and it's quite capable as well. I don't like it quite as much, but it's not like I hate it. I'm using I'm using GitHub on a daily basis. Um, so I guess I try to not be too particular. I mean, if a client's asking me what tools should we use, I'm going to give them my preference. But I try not to be too particular about I'm not going to refuse to work with a client because they're not using my favorite tool. Uh, so I think that kind of goes to the territory. I mean, DevOps and infrastructure, all this stuff is so diverse and so there's just so many tools that do roughly the same thing. I mean, yeah, there is room for somebody who's a guru at a very particular thing. You could be the GitLab guy or whatever. Um, and if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But that means you're not helping 90% of the clients out there, and that might be okay for you, but that's not the position I want to be in.
Right. No, it sounds good. It's funny you mentioned that because I have three primary clients right now: one on Bitbucket, one on GitLab, and the other one on GitHub. So I've
Hmm.
got write pipelines that work with all three of them. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. How about from a process standpoint? I guess this would be an
Hmm.
interesting one. How do you set up your DevOps? What they commit X, and then what happens? Like, how do you go about kind of breaking down how that pipeline from there from a dev's laptop all the way up to production lifecycle kind of works?
So, I mean, there's sort of an ideal I usually keep in mind that I'm trying to work toward. Uh, I don't know if I've ever achieved the ideal perfectly, but I've always tended to make strides toward it. And that ideal would be something very similar to just I think we could imagine the idealized continuous deployment scenario where you make a commit, all your tests run automatically and they go green, and 5 minutes later it's in production for your customers. That's the ideal that I think that honestly virtually every team should be striving to move toward. Many teams will never quite get there, but we know just because we can never achieve perfection doesn't mean we shouldn't make steps toward it. in reality, I usually join teams that have a bunch of practices in place. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Um, Maybe they have stage gated branching strategy like Git flow or something like that, which is sort of anathema to continuous delivery and continuous deployment. Maybe they have long manual validation processes by maybe a QA team or product owners or some hippo that makes the decision whether to deploy a feature or not. Um, so I try to work with these companies and these teams to identify the bottlenecks that are keeping them from achieving fast flow and good customer feedback and providing business values at the cliche, but that's what we're aiming for, and try to eliminate some of those bottlenecks, and by doing that we get closer to that ideal that I hope we'll achieve one day, but maybe it's not possible.
Gotcha. Well, that sounds, yeah, it makes a lot of sense there. Um, so if someone was interested in learning more about DevOps, like you said, it takes a certain breed to learn more. Are there any resources that come to mind off the top of your head that they could read on? Any books you'd recommend?
Well, probably the go-to book if you're trying to learn about the concepts of DevOps would be the Phoenix Project. That's
I
sort of
love that one.
the original book on the topic, or the more recent one, the Unicorn Project, is essentially the same story. Um, Both of them are fictional novels about tech. The Phoenix Project came out, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, and it's really designed, it's written more for like business leaders, management. And then the Unicorn Project is, like I said, essentially the same story, but told more for developers. So I honestly think the Phoenix Project's the better book. But if you're not into management, you might prefer if you're not a team lead or a CTO or something, you might prefer the Unicorn Project. It's designed for more individual contributors.
That's awesome. I did not know that there was a unicorn project. The Phoenix project, I was actually quoting to a client, not verbatim, but roughly quoting to a client who had one guy that was like their ninja guy that was in a corner,
Mm,
and he had set up this stuff with Terraform and didn't even. I'm like, do other developers know how to use this thing? He's like, no. Like, uh, but I'll teach him. I'm like, did you even push it up in version control? I'm like, what's the point of having it in Terraform if you hadn't bothered to get it off your laptop and put it into version control? So
yeah,
I was like, okay. And I told his bosses, I'm like, you need to close his laptop, tape his hands behind his back, and have another dev, be able to do this on like a weekly, monthly basis and actually drill that,
exactly. Yeah,
So I'm a huge fan of that. And additionally, I guess it's worth mentioning if you probably already read this, but the Goal by Dr. Eli Goldratt is like the
yeah.
OG kind of physical manufacturing version of this. And I think, and that was a same thing, a fable story, and I think that was somewhat of an inspiration for the Phoenix project. So
It definitely was, and honestly, it's a much better book. And I learned. I feel like I learned a lot more from the Goal than I did from the Phoenix Project. But a lot of people have a hard time making those connections that are kind of implicit between what the Goal teaches and how it applies to IT and software. So if you're good at making those abstract connections, read the Goal. If you're not, then the Phoenix Project is going to be a better choice.
yeah, no, I've even used the Goal in my consulting practices to make sure that I've got Slack in the machine, so we don't end up with
Hmm.
work stacked up for clients that I can't get to. And now my whole manufacturing process is off, or
Exactly.
delivery
Yep.
process. So huge fan of all those. Well, excellent. So do you want to talk a little bit about your current Go channel?
Yeah, sure. So, the beginning of the year, I really started focusing my efforts on a couple new initiatives related to Go programming. One of them is my YouTube channel, Boldly Go, where I upload sort of tutorials and how tos and code reviews and book reviews, all related to Go stuff with a slightly funny Star Trek ish theme. That's the name Boldly Go, from the opening of Star Trek.
I did not make that
Uh,
connection till now. It's brilliant.
yeah, I also do a daily mailing list where I write about Go. I'm doing a series where I go through the formal Go specification and take a paragraph or a point each day and explain it in sort of layperson terms. So the idea is to make the Go spec a little more accessible. I'm about halfway through the Go spec now. Um, so yeah, it looks like it's about a year long project. I've been, well, maybe a year and a half. I started in January, so here we are in November. Yeah, probably about a year and a half to get through the entire Go spec,
Wow.
one day at a time. But maybe I'll turn that into a book at some point, maybe an ebook or maybe a physical book, and turn it into like the Go spec study Bible or something like that.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah. That should be a good product. Here's an odd one for you. It's kind of a self-serving question. One of my clients has got an issue where there's one guy that wants to switch to Go. They've been used all their other microservices are in PHP. Like they've got tons of code in PHP. Only one developer that even remotely knows Go. My thoughts. Well, I guess. Would you recommend that they transition everything to Go, or kind of have one service or two services written in Go with just? And this is a dev team of about 15, 20 people, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
What would you advise them in that scenario?
Well, I wouldn't just rewrite the stuff in Go because I would want to make sure there's a reason to do it. Um, Go is a good choice. It's an easy to learn language, which is one reason it's a good choice. I would make sure there's at least two people on a team of 15. I'd make sure at least two people are interested in learning the language, because you don't want the one guy who knows Go to become the Brent from the Phoenix Project again, and he leaves or he just doesn't answer questions or whatever. So make sure there's at least two, and probably more than that, especially if you're thinking of doing a long-term transition to Go. Um, but Go is an easy language for people to pick up. If you know PHP, a lot of PHP developers, Ruby developers, Perl developers, Python developers feel fairly comfortable switching into Go. More so than your sort of like maybe Java or Kotlin developers. They often have a little bit more difficulty picking up Go, just because I don't know, it's just the flavor of the language is a little bit different. Um, So yeah, there shouldn't be a reason that you can't pick up Go as a team of PHP developers, but I wouldn't expect it to be an overnight change, and I wouldn't just start rewriting services. I mean, I would pick the ones that are the most maybe performance critical or that change the most, and switch those. And I would expect, I don't know how many services they have, but like maybe if they have 20, I would expect that after a year they'll have 3 on Go and 17 on PHP, and after 5 years they'll still have at least 10 on PHP, and that's probably fine as long as they're working and they're getting the maintenance they need. There's no rush to switch working code. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
All right. That's pretty much what I said. The big thing was make sure that you got cross training. You can't just have that one
Yeah.
guy. So, and then I referred them to your channel. So hopefully they can use that to train.
Awesome. Yeah.
We've gone about 22 minutes so far. I want to be respectful of your time. Any further parting thoughts on, I guess, either ops, DevOps, Go, or anything else? And feel free to tell them where they can find you.
I guess I could part with this. I have discovered over the years that the biggest obstacle to improving the way we deliver software is not technical. It's mindset and politics. So I guess I would encourage the listeners to keep that in mind. I mean, if you're trying to switch from PHP to Go, or if you're trying to improve your software deployment process, implementing CI/CD, or uh, getting rid of slow manual validation processes, whatever the case is, whatever you're trying to do to improve the system, keep in mind that the technical part is the easy part. The hard part is working with people who have different expectations and different experience than you do. So be gracious. Do what you can to teach them what you believe you've learned that they can benefit from, but it's not as easy as just writing a set of instructions and expecting the computer to do what you want. People aren't quite that simple, which is good and bad.
Absolutely. I couldn't have phrased it better. So that is very true. So, well, thank you for coming on the show today. I think,
Yeah,
I've
fun.
appreciated you having me on. If there's maybe we'll have you back on sometime, and I definitely would be interested in checking out. Oh, do you want to, your other podcast, the
Oh yeah.
DevOps? What was the other podcast?
So
Sorry.
I mean, I have two podcasts. One I produce
Adventures in
weekly
DevOps.
called Cup of Go, which is Go related news. So if you are learning Go and want to keep up to date with what's happening in the Go community, the Cup of Go podcast. If you're interested more in the operations and DevOps stuff, I'm also one of the co-panelists on the Adventures in DevOps podcast, which comes out also weekly. So check out both of those.
And I've been digging through the Adventures in DevOps. Sorry the word escaped me there, but yeah, that was an interesting one. So, well, good. Well, thank you for coming on. And hopefully we'll
Absolutely.
be talking again soon.
Very
Cheers.
good. Cheers.